long as you love, you will see me in the stars. As you look up at the stars, I will be there.
I'm Monica Charette, and this is Holding the Light.
As long as you love, I will whisper in your ear. Little whispers you will hear. As long as you love.
How many times have grieving parents heard the words, "I just can't imagine"? Many. Because, well, losing a child is incomprehensible. But we who know this pain are saying the same words when someone suffers the unimaginable a second time. While Debbie Reynolds would not and should not ever say she is childless, she has a new approach to life since the passing of her children, Michelle and Matthew. You'll be inspired by her courage as Colby and I hold the light with Debbie Reynolds. Today, Colby and I are honored to talk with Debbie Reynolds, formerly from Maine, but who now makes her home in Florida with her husband, Kevin. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you.
I want to start by saying I have such deep empathy for your grief journey, as I do with all of our guests, but to survive child loss 2 times in one lifetime is just unfathomable to me. You must hear that a lot.
I do.
Yeah. But yet you continue to find courage to help others in their child loss journeys. It's really very inspiring. The lives of your 2 children, Michelle and Matthew, your only children, deserve equal time and love and remembrance. How do you separate and process 2 very significant losses in your life at the same time?
I find that, well, first there was Michelle. So that was one thing. And then Matthew passed, I think, about 8 years after her. So it's only obviously been since his passing that I've had both of them. I do find that there's days where I like to say they visit me. So, I'll have Matthew days and I'll have Michelle days where, for whatever reason, they're really constantly in my thoughts that day, and things that remind me of them individually. Obviously, the anniversaries, death, birthday, I tend to think more of them on their individual days.
Yeah.
But even at other times, it's kind of weird, but it just...
Yeah, I often wondered about that. I mean, I can't compare what you experienced at all, but I had lost my dad less than 2 years before my daughter died, and it was really hard for me to separate those 2 grief processes.
I don't know that you separate them. I think it gets added to it.
That's a good point. Absolutely.
But there's definitely times where I'll be missing him more than her, or the other way around.
Yeah. I just wanted to help our listeners understand that your son Matthew was born first and Michelle was born about a year later. Is that right?
2 years.
2 years later. Yeah. Okay. So tell us a little bit about those first years together as a family, because you had a few years together.
Yeah. Well, Michelle was diagnosed at 9 months with her just genetic disorder. So I would say we had 9 months together.
Wow. Yeah, that's true.
And then life changed, and lots of doctors. She had a bone marrow transplant for treatment at 14 months. And that's the point where Matt started staying here, there, and everywhere. At the time, we were living in Virginia because I'm originally from Virginia. And when Kevin got out of the Navy, that's where we settled. So he'd go to my parents. He went to Maine a couple times with my husband's parents. Go good part of the time he stayed with my brother's family, who lived in the same town about 5 minutes from us. And sometimes he stayed with us at Ronald McDonald House.
Hmm.
She was in Washington, D.C. Children's Hospital, and we lived about an hour and a half from there. So we stayed at Ronald McDonald House, even though we were both working while she was in the hospital. It just made it easier to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So he stayed with us there, too.
So tell us what Hurler syndrome is first. Tell our listeners what that is.
Hurler syndrome is what they call a storage disorder, where she doesn't produce a certain enzyme, which breaks down sugar. So they get these, they're like kind of like jelly-like deposits throughout their body. It affects their development. It affects their orthopedic. They have a lot of orthopedic issues, and their organs. She had several things going on from birth, all of which were explained individually, up until about 6 months, when we finally got a diagnosis for something that was going on with her spine. And that's when the pediatrician sent us to the geneticist. She said, that's one thing too many. So the geneticist that we went to was one of the top ones in the country. He knew exactly what was wrong with her as soon as he saw her, but he did the test to confirm it. And unfortunately, if they don't get treatment, they only have 5 to 10 year life expectancy.
And this was detected fairly young, right? Like maybe 6 months?
Yeah. 9 months.
9 months. Okay.
By the time we went to the geneticist. And at that time, the only treatment was a bone marrow transplant. They have some other things they can do now, some enzyme therapy replacement, and I don't know what else, but I know there's other treatments. The younger that they do the transplant, the better of the success of it curing the disorder. They won't do them after they're 2, because at that point the damage is too far to help, and it won't be reversed.
Sounds like you became very educated in caring for your daughter.
Yes, I like to say I got my medical degree.
I bet. So tell us what happened then. How long did she live after her diagnosis?
Like I said, she had her transplant at 14 months.
Mm-hmm.
She was in the hospital about 6 weeks for that, which is normal. She came out, and up until a year later, she was doing pretty good. And then, so when you have a bone marrow transplant, one of 2 things can happen. You can have a rejection, where your body does not accept the marrow, so it doesn't start growing. The other thing is called graft versus host disease, which is where the marrow, in essence, rejects the host, the recipient of the bone marrow, which is what she developed. Most people that have a bone marrow transplant get some form of graft versus host disease. It just depends on the severity. Yeah. Hers got into her intestinal tract, and 13 months after her transplant, she went back into the hospital, and 2 weeks later went to ICU and was there for 5.5 months on a respirator. So yeah, the last 6 months were not so great, but we had good times during the in between.
Yeah.
You know, she went to school. She went to special ed preschool. Well, actually, they came to the house because her immune system was weak, so she couldn't be around kids. Mm. She started to school the week that she went back in the hospital the last time. And I think she went there once before she went in the hospital. But she continued to develop. The transplant took care of the Hurler syndrome. By the time she was discharged following her transplant, all of her internal organs that had been affected were back to normal within 6 weeks after post-transplant.
Amazing.
She did have a slight hearing loss, So she had hearing aids, and she was doing speech therapy. And she was starting to talk on my last birthday that she was with us. She said mama for the first time.
Oh, that's such a gift.
My last birthday, she said mama for the first time. And without her transplant, I would not have gotten that.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Because
saying. Such a gift.
I'm sure she would not have talked at all
Yeah.
if she hadn't had it.
So for you then, when do you think the grieving process actually began? Did it begin before she died?
Yes, because I actually, after she died, I went to like a seminar or workshop on, I don't remember if it was for special needs parents or grieving special needs parents. But the one thing I remember when I was there was when you have a special needs child, you grieve twice. You grieve first when you get the diagnosis that your child is not going to be normal. So you grieve for the child, this imaginary child that you had their whole life planned out, activities and college and marriage and kids and all that. When you get a special needs diagnosis, that changes. And that child no longer exists, similar to if they had died. Then, if they have, like Michelle, a condition that does lead to their actual death, you grieve again.
On the day.
On the day. And I thought that was interesting.
How do you manage your grief while supporting your 4-year-old son at the time?
You just push through.
You just do, right?
You just do. He helped a lot. I had to keep going for him, Through her sickness, we tried to keep his life as normal as possible.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get to see him ride a bike for the first time.
That's interesting.
The day before she went into the hospital for her transplant, we had his 4th birthday party. Mm-hmm. And the next day he went to Maine to stay with his grandparents for a couple weeks. And he got a bike, and Grandma taught him how to ride.
Wow.
And we didn't get to see it, and she didn't think to videotape it. So
yeah, you miss out on a lot of the first.
Yeah, you do miss out, even with your child that's not sick.
Right.
So, after she was gone, like I said, we tried to keep his life as normal as possible. But it's hard.
Yeah, he was so young. Did he go into counseling at all? Or did you as a family do counseling?
He did. He had some issues about a year afterwards where we took him to a counselor. One of the, I don't remember, I think she was a psychologist. I don't think she was the social worker that we had been working with at the hospital with Michelle. And so she met with him one-on-one. And what came out of that was that, we took him because he was seeing and talking to Michelle, which in some way I think he was, because I believe little children have that ability. But then it got to a point where it crossed a line, and I was something he said, and I was like, yeah, okay, we need to, and some other things were happening. So he went, and what came out was that he was having trouble falling asleep at night because he was afraid he was going to get cancer and die. And, he'd been at Ronald McDonald House. He knew kids got cancer. My mother was going through breast cancer at the time. Why he thought he'd get it, I have no idea. And then he did. So we had to deal with that.
Yeah. So tell us about Matthew then. He was diagnosed at what? So he was 13, I think you told me.
He was 12 when he was diagnosed. He had his 13th birthday, the last week of radiation treatment.
Okay.
So he was 13 when he died. And he had just started 7th grade. And he had been having headaches since like that May. I think they did a CAT scan. I don't remember. But the doctor seemed to think they were migraines.
Mm.
And it's the one time that I didn't push with a doctor to do more tests. After my experience with Michelle, I was always, well, even during when she was sick, I always kept pushing the doctors to, one, explain things so I could understand them, and two, to, really figure out what was going on. I didn't do that with Matt.
Mm.
I don't know why. Since then, his doctor, I asked him after Matt had passed, I said, would it have made a difference? And he said, no, it just might have sped things up. And, he got to go to Boy Scout camp for the first time that summer. So I'm okay with that. It's okay, Mom didn't push the doctors. So anyway, it's September, he had extreme headache and was diagnosed with a brain tumor and had surgery to remove it. The doctors came in. The oncology group came in, the doctor, the social worker, and I think a nurse. And they told my husband and me first before we talked to Matthew that it was, when they got the biopsy back, it was malignant. And so we kind of broke down, and they gave us a few minutes to process it. And they came back in, and I told the social worker, we need to talk because we're not your normal family, and you need to know the history. Since then, since he died, I did go to Maine Children's Cancer Program. Their social workers do a parents' grief group for their patients' families, and she was running it, so I've become very good friends with her. And she told me, she's like, I just remember that day thinking, who is this woman that is talking to me like this? But I feel like a gift that Michelle gave me was learning to speak up like that and how to talk to the doctors to get the answers, because I didn't have the time to learn with him. He was gone too quick.
It must have been so hard to navigate his illness too after losing Michelle. I mean, knowing what the outcome could possibly be.
Yeah, it was. We tended to let him take the lead.
Who's him?
Matt.
Really? How so?
On how much did he want to fight it?
Okay.
Hindsight, that might not have been the best choice in the last month or two. But he wanted, and I find this true with all the kids that I've met that are terminally ill. They just want to be normal, because they're going through so much. They grow up very fast, way too fast, and they grasp for something normal. For Matt, normal was going to school. He was an excellent student, and he wanted to continue going to school. The day after he got home from the hospital after his surgery, we met with his teachers, and they're like, do you want to, we'll send work home to you, or do you want to go to school? And he's like, I'll be here Monday. This was like Thursday. And they're like, really? You just had brain surgery 3 days ago. And he's like, yeah, I'll be here Monday. And I said, you got a doctor's appointment. Oh, okay. I won't be here Monday, but I'll be here Tuesday. So because of that, we had to go for 6 weeks every day to Portland from Fairfield. Hour and a half, 2-hour drive each way for radiation treatment. So I would pick him up at 2:00 when he got out of school, and we'd drive down and we'd drive back. Our church was amazing. They had meals delivered to us 3 times a week. We called them. My husband had a bad back, so he wasn't able to drive. I was the one that had to do it. People signed up to drive with us a couple days a week, church and family and friends. We called them the magic boxes on the porch. They were 2 styrofoam coolers, one hot, one cold. We didn't know what was going to be in there, but when we got home, there was always food, and I didn't have to cook after, driving for 3 hours for a 15-minute radiation appointment. So, just trying to keep him as normal as possible for him was very important.
Mm-hmm.
Debbie, I'm curious to ask you, and just for a little context, when I had lost, my sister, I was 15. And I know for a fact that at the age of 4, so much of your learning is nonverbal. It's the experiences around you that you sort of gather what your sense of normal is. I'm curious, when he got his diagnosis and throughout, a vigorous treatment for, brain cancer, did he ever seem to show you some level of wisdom, maturity, courage, experience? Was there ever any moments, things he said or did that to you almost made you feel as though like, wow, he has a deeper understanding of what is going on because of those experiences and because of the loss that you and him had suffered?
Definitely. Well, let me start by saying Matt was mature beyond his years. I think because of Michelle, but also he was very intelligent. He was in the gifted program. In fact, he did understand. We never had the conversation, which I kind of regret at this point, of, am I going to die, Mom? We never had that. But again, we let him make the decisions on that. I feel that he did think about it, because after he was gone, I was going through some of his school papers that his teachers gave me. And one of them was, it was a worksheet, and it was like, list, 4 things you're proud of or something like that. And one of the things he wrote was, I conquered cancer, or I beat cancer. And then he crossed out that word and he put fought. And I don't know, to me, that's saying he knew that he wasn't going to win that fight. But he never told me about it. And that was difficult. But I think he did understand very clearly, well, he knew from the beginning that was a possibility. The doctor told us that, they did surgery. They thought they got it all. They did radiation to make sure. And they said if it started growing again, that there pretty much was nothing they could do for him. So he knew that. And he was diagnosed, had a surgery in late September. And by January or February, he knew it was growing again. So yeah, I think he did understand. But he still wanted to keep fighting it. So at that point, we were at, trials are your only possibility, and we don't know if they'll work, and we don't know, what it'll do to him. But he still wanted to do them.
Sounds like he definitely put up a fight then.
Oh, he did. He was a fighter. And funny, and great sense of humor, even through it all.
Debbie, do you think they're together now?
Absolutely.
And do you have signs and feelings in your life that come to you that make you feel closer to them? Do you experience things in nature or
I do.
in your everyday life? Yeah, tell us about it.
The anniversary, the first year after Matt had died, he died on April 14th. And we were out working in the yard, and there were some leaves by the garage. There was a purple crocus coming up. Purple is my favorite color. I have never in my life planted a crocus. It was on April 14th
Wow.
that came up. And I said, "Hi, Matt."
Yeah.
So up until that time, I transplanted because it was just not in a garden. So I moved it to the garden. And after that, pretty much every year that week of April 14th was when it would bloom. Then we moved to Florida, so I dug it up and I took it out to my mother-in-law's. We were going to build a house in Unity, but that never happened. But I put it there, and I have a memorial garden there that I also transplanted from Fairfield, which all of the plants, it's mostly daylilies, but all of the plants, the name of the plant has something to do with one of the kids.
Well, Debbie, I'm not sure if you know this, but you know how a lot of people, especially within botanical communities, will ascribe certain values to various flowers, and the purple crocus is meant to resemble gracefulness, dignity, and personal success.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yeah. So that's one sign, and there's been others. I can't think of any right off the top of my head.
That one's pretty powerful.
Yeah, it is. And I think I remember that one especially because every year around the 14th, it blooms, And even now that we're in Florida, my mother-in-law goes out and she's checking that week, and she'll send me a picture. She's like, "Yep, he's saying hi again." So, yeah.
Debbie, what do you say to people when they ask you, and we get this question all the time, just in normal conversation, is how many kids do you have? How do you respond to that question?
Depends on who's asking and the circumstances.
That's fair.
Obviously, if it's somebody that I'm going to have long-term contact with, I'm going to tell them. And if the question is, do you have kids? I'll say, yes, I have 2 children. They're, unfortunately, they've both passed, And then I tell them the story. Usual response is that person feels bad. And then I feel bad for making them feel bad. But in a way, there's a poem. I can't think about it, but the name of it. But it says, basically, don't feel bad because you think you make me sad to remember my children. Don't feel bad because you think you made me remember my children. I always remember my children.
That comes up so often in our conversations.
Yeah, you asking me about it is not going to make me sad. It's actually the opposite. I love my kids. I love talking about my kids. I want to share them with people. I want people to know how awesome they were.
Right. Say their name. Say their name out loud to me and say that, Matthew would have loved this, or Michelle, wouldn't it have been great if she could experience this? Mm-hmm. That's what you want to hear people say.
One of my favorite things, as I said, Matt was a great student. His best friend, other extreme. So he'd come over after school to play, and Matt would say, "Can I go out and play?" And I'd say, "Is your homework done?" He'd say, "Yeah, I did it in school." And I'd turn to his friend and say, "Is your homework done?" And he, kind of roll his eyes and look around, avoid looking at me. And Matt would get after him, say, "Dude, you got to do the work. He's like, come on, I'll help you with it. And they do the homework and then they go play. The year that Matthew would have graduated, two of his friends, one who had been one of his best friends, and they had a falling out a few months before Matt got sick, and they never made up. And the other one was, I think, his girlfriend, or they were heading in that direction. They came by the house and asked if it would be okay to include a memorial page in the yearbook. So I gave them pictures, and they gave us a copy of the yearbook. And I did go to the class night. I didn't go to graduation, but I did go to class night. And I saw his other best friend and his mom. So the September after Matt died, his friend was walking home from school one day, and I happened to be outside. And I said, hey, how's it going? He's like, great. I haven't missed a day yet. This is like 2 weeks into school. And for him, that was a huge deal that he hadn't missed a day yet. And I'm like, good job. Keep up the work. Good work. And that night she told me, she thanked me. She said, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Matt.
That's another way that he's present with other people.
Yeah. So that's when we're, talk about him. I love to hear things like that.
How has your grief changed over the years? What have you learned along the way that maybe you can share with others who are just beginning this journey?
Yes. And I have. I don't know if it's grief, but how did I get hooked up with? I think through the hospice group. I went for several years and talked to nursing students at UMA about what it was like to have a terminally ill child, and what happened, the process after you lose the child, and ways that they could help families in that situation. So I did that for several years. I have a lot of nurse friends, one of which is Michelle's, her primary nurse. We're still very good friends. She lives in Savannah now, and we meet up at Disney once or twice a year. But I told her and my other friend about this, and they were both like, wow, every nursing school should have a similar opportunity for nurses, because and I told Michelle's nurse, I said, well, you're my prime example of what you should do, because she went out above and beyond to help us.
I would agree with that. And I would take that a step further and say that you could have this conversation with every person that has contact with you in that situation, from the person that greets you in the emergency room to the nurses, the doctors, the social workers, pastoral care. The experience that we had was very challenging. And I would love to go back and really share that with the caregivers to help them understand if they've never had this experience.
And I think it's worthwhile. I know the one thing that the professor, who's also a good friend of mine now, if nothing else, I've gotten friends along the way from my experience with my kids. The one thing that I used to say that she always told me was so important is, well, a couple things to that they're not just treating the child, they're treating the whole family, especially if the child passes, that it's not just one patient, like with adult patients, and that it's okay for them to show emotion, because so many of them think, I can't do that it'll upset the family, but it actually, especially when they get to know the child, little different in your situation because it was quick, but my kids were seeing these providers weekly, daily, and they got close to the kids. And, to have a doctor or nurse think, I can't tear up, that comes across wrong to the family.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, maybe you don't really care,
Yeah.
And I've also talked to parents. I do scrapbooking, photo albums.
Mm-hmm.
I had been working on Matt's up until he died, and I just couldn't do that. But I found, and I hadn't done any of hers because I just wasn't ready to face that. But I went on a scrapbooking retreat not long after he died. And I actually found at that point, and I guess this is how do you grieve the two at the same time? I could work on her album. And it was actually very therapeutic because at that point it had been 8 years since she had passed. And I'd forgotten there were good times. And I saw that in the pictures, even between transplant and second hospitalization at the end. And then I was at same scrapbook retreat probably a year or two later, and there was a mother there who had recently lost her baby. And she was trying to work on her album, and she just didn't know what to start. So I went home and I got Michelle's album and I shared it with her. And I told her, you might actually find it therapeutic. You might only be able to do it 5 minutes at a time, but give it time and work with it. So I talked to her a little bit about it, and I don't know, hopefully helped her.
Well, I think that just really speaks to there is no timeline for grief, and everybody needs to do what they can do at any given point in their life. You've found a lot of meaningful ways to support other families and child loss, including our family. So Debbie and I have never met before. And in preparing for our conversation, Debbie, I found out that in the days following Cassidy's sudden passing, you rounded up your church family and prayer knitters, and you knit these beautiful blue prayer squares in memory of Cass with a number 11 on them for her jersey, soccer jersey, in just a few days, too, by the way, and gave them all to her soccer teammates. So I want to tell you, thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Never knew that was you.
Oh, you did?
No, did not know that. Just found that out.
Yeah, I heard you just found that out.
Yeah. So your children will definitely not be forgotten. In closing, the question we always ask our guests is, and take your time with this because both of your beautiful children need to be remembered, both Michelle and Matthew, but how would you like us to remember your children?
Smiling and together, the two of them together.
That's a beautiful image.
Yeah.
This has just really been an enlightening conversation. I know I'm inspired by you, and I know that sharing your grief journey and the love that continues for your children will reach out to our listeners who need to hear it most. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie.
Thank you for doing this. It's very much needed, I think.
Thank you.
As long as you love.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this podcast helpful, please share our link with others and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. I'm Monica Charette, reminding you that you are never alone in your grief. Until next time, we'll be right here with you, holding the light.
As long as you love. As long as you love.